Like Luisa said, I'm normally from ALPSP.com. I'm going to do a raise your hands thing. Are people familiar already with Almetric and Almetrix? Yeah? Oh, okay, that's pretty good. That's a good answer. Thank you very much. Just the kind of really short version, we collect originally article level metrics, but really any kind of data around research output. So conversations on social media, for example, on blogs. It could be things like reader counts on Mendeley or Zotero now coming up. It could also be more kind of impacty things, if you like. So if you imagine citations in grey literature, things like policy documents or clinical guidelines, that kind of thing. So the idea is that we pull this together, and then you can show it to the author, or you can look at it as a publisher at a journal level, and get a feel for, just the wider conversation around your work. But today I'm here to talk about Bookmetrix, which is a project we did on behalf of Springer. Well, Springer Nature now, but at the time it was Springer. And just to go straight into what it is, I'll go into this in a bit more detail. We kicked off the project with this sort of inception deck process, like, as part of the way we developed the software with them. And the first thing is you have to draw a box. Like if you were going to go into a shop and buy this application, what would the box look like, and what are the bullet pointed features you'd have on it. And this is the one that we had for Bookmetrix. Maybe a little bit more competitive than it turned out, but stop judging books by their covers. Let's produce something that lets you see all the conversations around a book, not just a research article, which is what we've done before with Almetric. Go beyond just a single book, find the most popular books in your discipline, that kind of thing. And importantly, aggregate a lot of different kind of metrics and data in one place. And the reason we want to do this is, first of all, from an Almetric perspective, is because we've heard about it from our customers. So we do a lot of work with publishers, with many people here. We also work a lot, though, with funders and institutions. And one of the big requests we get from them is always, okay, well, the article stuff is fine, but what about books? And especially in the arts and humanities, and in subjects where books are much more of a primary research output, it's quite a big deal. If you think about here in the UK, the REF exercise that happened last year, about 16% of the output submitted to the REF, so that's the top work, if you like, from UK institutions, were books. A lot of them were in the arts and humanities, but there's obviously STM books in there as well. And the problem is that they're actually systematically undervalued. So this is the phrase from the HEFGE, the Higher Education Funding Council here in the UK, did a review of the use of metrics in research assessment recently. You might have seen it at the beginning of the summer. And one of the things it pointed out is that books get systematically undervalued just because the citation indexes aren't there yet. And obviously there's new book citation indexes coming out and things, but it's a relatively small percentage of books. It means you miss a lot of citations. So we know that the existing systems aren't necessarily great to begin with. We know that we've had a lot of success doing this kind of thing for journal articles. So success in the sense that end users like it, the institutions, that funders are appreciative of it. And then finally, we know just from the authors of the books themselves that people want to know this information. Right? Again, it's natural when you publish something, especially a book, if you spent time on a book chapter or a whole monograph even over the course of many years, wise that it gets published and then it's kind of forgotten about. Maybe you chase the editor for your download stats a couple of times afterwards, but you should get more feedback than that. So that's kind of the hand wavy thing. The cold-hearted capitalist pig dog use cases, if you like, are really you can use this data to first of all back up a sales pitch. You can go to the author or to people buying these books and say, look, other people are reading them and finding them useful. To authors, you can say, look, you can get this extra data by publishing from us, and also you can get a bit more kind of business intelligence, if you like, or market intelligence, looking at the books that are popular and the ones that aren't. So all of these things were things that Almetric were thinking about, and also things that Springer were thinking about. So we were already working with people at Springer on journal level Almetrics, and we had a very good relationship with people there. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But this is what came out of it, the Bookmetrix product. So you can see it now if you go to springerlink.com, if you go to book pages on Springer, and you'll see something like this on the left-hand side. So that's part of the wider page, but on the kind of the sidebar, you'll see this provided by Bookmetrix data. And against each book, it'll have things like the downloads and the citations, the mentions, that kind of thing. And if you click on it, you'll get brought to a bigger, more detailed page about the book, which is on the right-hand side there. And I'll talk about that in a couple of slides. But first, what I wanted to talk about a little bit was the experience of working with a larger publisher. So I think I can get away. This is a blatant copyright violation. That's The Snail and the Whale. It's a Macmillan book, so I think I can get away with it. I'm not sure. But, you know, ALPSP is a very small company, if you didn't know already. We're about 20 people here in London. And obviously, Springer is a much bigger company. We're not a contract development company. It's not something we normally do. And I think I was certainly a little bit worried about how it would work out, you know, if we start doing work with a much larger corporation. But it was actually the most successful product we've ever done, I think, the most successful project we've ever done. And it was down to a few things that I wanted to mention. So the first is just the agile development process and being very clear at the beginning what we're setting out to do, making sure that at every point along the way we had something deliverable. It wasn't necessarily, you know, ready for the public, but you could still use it and we could show it to editors, show it to authors, this kind of thing, get feedback. I think really importantly was the fact that there was one main product owner at Springer, which is Martijn Roelants, who's here, and I think he presented yesterday as well for the Innovation Awards. And being able to talk directly to Martijn and have him be able to answer questions about what the product should do, as opposed to like a committee of 20 people, which is what you can get potentially with working with a large group, was really, really useful. The equivalent on the All-Metric side was that we had a single product manager, we had a dedicated team, and one person that was just doing Bookmetrix with Martijn. Obviously, there were a lot of people involved on the Springer side outside of that, but they funneled through one person. And so in the end, it took about 3 months for us to get to a point where we could demo quite happily to other people. It was kind of a usable product, and about 6 months in total to launch. So in addition to the book pages, this is what we actually launched. We saw before about, you know, part of it's finding out about a single book, and the rest of it's about, you know, finding out about a topic of books. What can you search by keyword and see all the books that are getting the most citations in that area, for example, or the most mentions and the most downloads, this kind of thing. So we produced an interface like this, which is fairly straightforward. So at the top you enter a search term. You can also do a few other facets, so look at a particular subject or sort in a different way, this kind of thing. And then I'll show the results. And each one of those titles, one of those covers rather, you can click on, you can get to the full details page again. We didn't manage to do everything that we wanted to do, so there's a few things like book series. It would be nice to be able to put in a book series and then, or see which series are the most popular, this kind of thing, that we didn't get around to, but it's still very powerful, quite fast as well, it's very important. I didn't go into a lot of detail on the pages with the different tabs and things, but it's this kind of stuff. So on that details page that you see when you click through on a book, there's two main components. On the left-hand side, there's a list of all the chapters, and this is quite a big deal, obviously, in books. It's fine if the entire book is authored by one person, then it's only one object. What happens if there's, you know, 40 chapters potentially with 40 different authors or more? Ideally, each one of those chapters should be treated as a separate entity. Quite often in certainly the ALPSP mentions we saw was people talking about a single chapter within a book. So how do we assign that credit correctly, but also kind of ramp it up, roll it up, if you like, to the whole book. So in Bookmetrix, you have the choice of either looking at a single chapter within a book or looking at a kind of book level aggregation. Within that, you see all the kind of stats that you would imagine you would see in Bookmetrix. So again, downloads, so that's downloads from Springer. Citations from whatever citation data we can get. I think it's Crossref coming from the Springer citations API. And then in terms of ALPSP, again, things like reader counts, Mendeley, and we can enrich that with things like what are the job titles there, what are the countries they come from, this kind of thing. Other Altmetric sources like citations on Wikipedia, so citations outside of just journals and other books, importantly. And the feedback was pretty good. I think authors liked it. We launched it just before the London Book Fair back at the beginning of the year, end of Q1. And authors immediately took to it. I think Martijn showed some slides yesterday about how many people were using it and this kind of thing. And I think we consider the project a success. It was in very many ways a kind of exploratory project for both sides. We knew we had all these problems with books and we wanted to see how far we could get with a real project using real data. I think it worked very well, partly because Springer was the partner. And this is why. Apart from the fact that they had a lot of books content, obviously that helped. Helped do quite a large system with just one publisher. But also, I think importantly, they had already invested in some technical infrastructure that kind of paid off for us. Made it quite easy for us to do some things later on. So they were already issuing DOIs to all their books, DOIs to all their chapters, importantly, linking the chapters to the book level record within Crossref. There was a very good metadata API on the Springer side where you can throw it a DOI and get back sort of richer metadata than you get from just the DOI record. And they also had a download and citations API, and those things were all maintained, so it's quite easy to get answers to questions when, inevitably those questions arose. Ideally, what we wanted to do in the longer term is look wider, right? Look at other publishers as well. Could you bring everything into one system? When you're talking to a librarian, they're not just interested in Springer books. That's a very large percentage of books in some fields, but ideally it would be across lots of publishers. And so this is more background information about some of the problems we encountered when we thought about rolling it out further. And the first one is really, again, Springer had that technical infrastructure in place, but a lot of publishers don't, for very good reasons, or they do for just some books going forward. The metadata, there's that thing about metadata being a love letter to yourself in the future and all that kind of thing. And it's very true, actually. If you look at journal metadata, which we do for Altmetric all the time, there's occasionally you get errors or things aren't registered in time, this kind of thing, but by and large it's still used by people, and therefore people see it, and therefore people correct the mistakes. Book metadata in Crossref is not great. It's all supplied by the publishers, so it is, to some degree, it's garbage in, garbage out. But it's because a lot of that metadata isn't seen, it's not used until you have the application, and the applications can't go there until the data is in a good form. It's kind of a chicken and egg problem. So hopefully as we go forward and we've started building a tool like this, we can feed back to publishers and say, where there still needs to be some work to be done. Related to that is just, where DOIs aren't appropriate. Obviously, books do have ISBNs. There's problems with ISBNs not being a global identifier, with different versions of the book, obviously having different ISBNs, which is what you're meant to do, but it does make it difficult for us to connect the ebook in the UK with the, the hardcover in the US. There might be a different publisher with a different ISBN. And with that, I'll leave it. I think the best thing to do if you're interested in learning more is actually to come and see the product itself. You can go to bookmetrix.com and there's some screenshots and example books there, or you can come and see me and Martijn during the conference. I think we'd both be happy to actually show you something live. Thanks. Any questions?
This is Tom Molan from Ubiquity Press. Hi. Presumably at the moment this only works for books and book chapters which have got DOIs?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And what's the, aside from that, is there, what were the significant sort of differences and challenges compared with setting this up for journals? Because presumably if you've got like a web page for the book or the book chapter and you've got the DOI on that page, is it pretty much the same?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest challenges is not so much a technical one, it's more of a social thing, in that if you think about people talking about articles now, you link to the article, right? The electronic version of the article is pretty standard. Certainly if you think about social media, you blog about something or you tweet about something, you're linking to it. When you tweet about a book, people don't necessarily do that, especially more on the kind of monograph end. You might say, oh, I just read the new Assyrian history piece by Professor Smith or whatever, but you don't necessarily then link to the bookstore where you buy that book. So that requires a little bit more thinking, I think. It turned out actually that we weren't sure when we kicked off the project, I think, if anyone talked about books in Altmetrics. And it turns out they do quite a lot. And they do use links, but there's definitely like a challenge there in finding all these other ways of talking about books and linking them back to the record.
Thanks for that. We have books with DOIs running right through them, so how easy would it be for us to sort of start using Bookmetrix? But another little twist, all our books are embeddable, and so they are embedded on third-party websites. Would you be able to pick up all those instances as well?
So the answer to the second question is it's a qualified yes. The important thing is being able to identify where those sites are, which so unfortunately is a bit of a, the more free you are with the content, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because if we don't know where it is, then we can't track it. Having DOIs on books is definitely the first step. The other thing that gets more complicated is if then you want to go into a chapter level thing. It's very hard to identify the chapters unless they've also got some sort of unique identifier. Oh, okay, yeah. So then, yeah, that makes it a lot more straightforward. One of the other challenges we got, I didn't cover in great detail, but there's simple bits of metadata that you don't necessarily realize you need until you come to build the tool. Things like the ordering of the chapter. So a lot of publishers have a DOI for the book, a DOI for each chapter, but with that metadata, there's no way of knowing which is chapter 1 and which is chapter 2, and this kind of thing. And without that information, you can't display it properly, for example. And we have to just have a random list of chapters associated with the book, which seems like a small thing, but it's only, again, when you show it that you realize it.
Thanks very much.
Cool. Thank you very much.